Desert Oracle Radio, the voice of the desert.
Night has fallen on the desert. This past Saturday, yesterday in my timeline, May 17, I had to drive down the hill for a medical appointment. Very exciting. Because it was either come on a Saturday or how about the end of June. And this was something I wanted to get done and over with. Down the hill is what mountain people often say when they are headed to the flatlands of civilization or something like it. Land of the Costco, the steakhouse, the car dealership service center, the Trader Joe's, and the many medical services, from dentist to the nuclear imaging center to the Botox clinic that runs out of the eye doctor's office. We say it in the high desert, down the hill, I mean, because we are at an elevated altitude of about 4,000 feet where I'm at, but I've heard the phrase down the hill to mean the same thing over in Pinion Hills and Phelan and Hesperia, referring to going down Cajon Pass to Rancho Cucamonga, the Inland Empire, and etc. And I've heard it in the Sierra Mountain towns on the west side, referring to the Central Valley cities where you go down to the Costco and the Smart and Final. Once I heard a girl in Flagstaff say it about Phoenix, although she was from El Dorado Springs, where they say it about Denver. Everything looked good enough, fine and good, going through Morongo Valley, but as soon as I hit the grade, something was just off. The vibe was wrong, you know? People who were driving relatively normally a few minutes earlier were suddenly behaving in strange, erratic ways. And then there was a mad dash ahead of me as everyone started changing lanes and weaving in and out of traffic, and there are only 2 lanes to start with on the southbound side, same as the north. Once I cleared a few winding curves, I saw the problem, or one of them. On the northbound side, there had been a car crash. And one lane, the right lane over there, was still blocked. CHP was there along with a sheriff's car or 2, and that inside lane was closed, so it was the usual chaos whenever that happens. And then ahead of me, about 30 cars ahead, I think, I saw another CHP car or a truck or some ungodly combination of the two, and it was flashing its traffic control lights and doing that thing where they sort of stay in the middle of the 2 lanes to keep you from doing anything else. The authorities, the powers that be, had decided that people were just driving too fast coming up and coming down, with at least one accident to show for it. And as soon as that CHP vehicle, who was in front of my wagon train of cars, got to the bottom, it immediately went over the median and headed back up to do it again. And as soon as the law enforcement was out of sight, of course, a Dodge Charger and an enormous pickup truck, which I could not see over or around, started playing chicken when the 62 flattens past the Desert Hot Springs turnoff. This is where I usually turn on my map, going down the hill to see which roads in the Palm Springs have closed since I left the house 20 minutes earlier. The wind was strong, all the cars were rocking, and the tourists were hitting their brakes like that would stop the wind gusts. And somebody in a Nissan manages to run themselves off the road from the left lane about 4 cars ahead of me. So everybody ahead of me has to brake hard, and thankfully nobody else crashes. My map finally updates and it says it's getting me around various road closures, as is often the case. But Indian Canyon, from the 10, is still open. Despite the Sahara blast of white sand through the eternal construction site there. And then I'm sent in the wrong direction, so I pull over to see what's closed and where, and it's Indian Canyon right there through Palm Springs, where I'm headed for the appointment. Once I get around the various roadblocks and to my destination, I sit in the waiting room and look at the phone to see what's going on. My first thought was it's a street fair. It's a weekend in the merry month of May. But instead, a maniac had blown himself up, along with his car, outside a fertility clinic I've driven or walked past many times over the years. It's one of those places that does all the complicated and difficult stuff required to have a baby when the regular system of wine and old jazz records didn't do the trick. The main road north out of downtown Palm Springs was closed for many blocks. There was nothing yet on the local news sites, but Twitter already had a bunch of details. And as my wait turned into 90 minutes, the governor of California and the U.S. attorney in California and the FBI and the Riverside County Sheriff's Department had all put out brief statements on Twitter about what was going on down there. We live in strange times. They're difficult times for many people, not so much in terms of basic survival. Obesity epidemics are uncommon when basic survival is the issue, but in terms of general human unhappiness, lack of purpose, lack of belief in anything that has in the past made life not only bearable, but better, beautiful even, something to cherish, despite the little ups and downs, despite the fact that nobody's perfect and no one has a perfect life, that even a beautiful life will see illness, adversity, sorrow, and ultimately the death of the body. Everybody before us knew that. They knew all of it. And yet, widespread and mainstream personal despair was little known before what the pioneering sociologist Max Weber, or Max Weber in English, called the Age of Disenchantment. When the everyday world of everyday humans on Earth just shattered. A time that reached different people at different points, but generally followed industrialization and the shrinking of the world through widespread global trade and communication, the time of the steamship, the telegraph, the railroad, radio and other mass media, the rise of the cities and the emptying of the farmlands, as agriculture no longer required the work of most humans on Earth. Consider the stock character of old stories, the village idiot, who tended to live in a tight-knit community where everybody knew everybody, including the village idiot. And everybody made basic accommodation for his condition. If he could work, he did a job that fit his abilities and eccentricities. Who cares if the churchyard gravedigger sings strange tunes or has nonsensical conversations with himself during the working day? Or maybe he helped out around the farm best he could, maybe feeding the livestock or baling hay, etc. Sometimes the angels watched over such people, but if the angels were otherwise occupied, the locals would generally keep an eye out. "Time to go home, Billy," they might say, as he wandered around the village green at midnight howling at the moon. "Your mama's waiting up, Billy. Let's head on home." Now, the late great Warren Zevon may be the finest writer of American popular song between the 1970s and the early 2000s. He told us what happens when such simple-minded people are exposed to the dark magic of modern telecommunications. In his song, Muhammad's Radio. In walked the village idiot, and his face was all aglow. He'd been up all night listening to Muhammad's Radio. Don't it make you want to rock and roll? All night long? You ever see those 1970s documentary films with the madrasas in Afghanistan or rural Iran? All those boys rhythmically reciting verses from the Quran in their narrow mud brick classroom, their heads all rolling in unison. What happens when somebody can cause that from a distance? By chanting over the shortwave, riling up the yokels. Radio is hypnotic, or it can be. The mix of music and what sounds like somebody speaking only to you. Directly to you, right into your ears. Who knows what you might be convinced to do? What you might be convinced to believe.
Desert Oracle Radio.
Somebody could say, "And ye shall have a great thirst," and you can now think of nothing but quenching this great thirst. Your throat's so dry, it feels like sandpaper, and next thing you know, even though thirst had not been on your mind, well, nothing but a big glass of cold water is going to stop this awful sensation, this burning thirst. And in this way, the village idiot from the Warren Zevon song has been riled up to commit terrorism. After my appointment, I took myself out for a steak dinner. That's usually my reward after going down the hill to deal with whatever modern hassle. At least I'll get a good restaurant meal before going back up the hill. So I'm at one of my regular haunts at my favorite table, taking a quick look at the news while enjoying a martini. And now it is revealed that the person who blew himself up outside the fertility clinic is from 29 Palms. He was only about an hour ahead of me going down the hill. Had I left a little bit earlier, I might have been driving by when it happened. Who knows? Lots of people might have been driving by. Had they not stopped for a coffee or to fill up the gas tank or got delayed for 5 minutes at home. There was relatively good news too. While 4 or 5, depending on the report, 4 or 5 people had been injured. There were no other fatalities beyond the driver, the bomber. And a day later, it would be reported that all 4 had gone home. And the management of the fertility clinic announced that none of the embryos in cold storage there had been affected, and that the clinic would be open again for business on Monday, and they would continue to serve their many patients who are trying to have babies. When I first heard the target was a reproductive health clinic, and that vague legalese management language they use on the news now, I had first assumed it was a place that deals in birth control in its various forms. Because such places, abortion clinics especially, have been targeted by individual nutcases with homemade bombs for my whole adult life and probably yours. I had not yet realized the extent of a newer death cult that has swollen up like a poison mushroom in the darkness of the internet in very recent months and years. They call themselves, among other things, anti-natalists. They aren't happy with their own lives, and they are exceedingly angry that they were not asked if they wanted to exist. And on the extreme end, they aim to kill themselves while killing others. From other adults to human embryos in that strange state of frozen in-between life. To anybody who is employed by such places or just happens to be walking by or stopping at the vintage shop across the street or whatever. And trying to keep up with every new mental illness that results in an internet-connected community of violent lunatics is very much not in my job description. I moved to the desert to commune with the roadrunners and the rattlesnakes, not to find the sickest people and the saddest places online. Yet sometimes, those very people will show up IRL in real life right in your part of the world, ready to blow you up for simply being in the wrong place, which was a normal place a moment earlier. And so then we are compelled to lift up that old half-rotted piece of plywood out back and see how many creepy crawlers are beneath it. The Reddit group called Anti-Natalism has 232,000 members. There were hundreds of them currently online when I took a look. Who knows how many were just looky-loos too, coming to find out what the new sickness is, like I did. Of course, there is a statement up top from the moderator distancing themselves from the bombing of the Palm Springs fertility clinic. It says, "It has come to my attention that the individual responsible for today's bombing in Palm Springs name-dropped our communities in their suicide note. The philosophy we represent is explicitly one of nonviolence. We believe it is up to each individual to make their own reproductive decisions, etc. And the post is locked. No comments, of course, so nobody in the group can contradict the CYA statement." The statement was followed by a long list of topics or beliefs that are verboten, at least as of the day after the bombing. One of these is pro-mortalist, which I've come to learn means pro-death. Your own, somebody else's, whatever. I'm sure there are 300 sub-beliefs, all increasingly insane, and they all wind up being sound arguments for peacefully shutting down the internet. Here's the list. No fascist, always got to get that in there on Reddit. No eugenics. No speciesism. No pro-mortalism. No pro-suicide content. No baby hate, no parent hate, no vegan hate, no carnist hate, no memes on weekdays. Carnus sounds like some obscure Catholic doctrine, but I'm not Catholic, so who knows. The hot post on this forum during my brief visit included, "Stop having kids, please." "Why are anti-natalists seen as toxic?" And "People call us crazy, but we are winning." This village idiot, previously a resident of 29 Palms before he blew himself up in Palm Springs, apparently also considered himself I don't know how to say this because it's one of those internet terms that cannot be spoken because it's a word typed backwards. The word is life. How would you even pronounce this? Ephilism? Ephilism? Now I feel like unaliving myself, even knowing this exists. So these are the anti-natalists who also want to end the lives of people who are currently alive. I think that's right. It hardly matters, as the anti-natalism subreddit with 232,000 members is filled with stuff such as, "I don't condone the attack, but..." sort of comments, you know the type, just hundreds of them everywhere I look. They're also proudly quoting their philosophical ringleader, this guy called David Benatar, who was just profiled by the New Yorker, I believe, and is no relation to Pat, as far as I know. Where's Philip K. Dick when you need him? This is a PKD plot, but I can't remember from which story, which novel. He wrote so many. And so many of them were hazy yet accurate descriptions of this very moment in time, the early 21st century. So that ephilism. You know, I just e-filed my state taxes a month ago. Hope you got your rebates back if you did. Whatever it is, the Reddit overlords unalived it. It's no longer there. But the bomber, according to the people in the anti-natalism subreddit, was, quote, "an active member until a month ago," end quote. For some insight into these strange online worlds spilling over to the physical realm, I suggest you look up the internet culture writer Catherine D, D-E-E, like John D, on Substack and or Twitter. She knows all about this stuff, has been reporting on these online back alleys for a long time. And Guy Edward Bartkus, who was 25, will not be posting anywhere any longer. He left a half-hour-long audio recording on his website with his manifesto, and I'll spare you all from learning about it. Go look it up if you want. Well, he was in a 2010 Ford Fusion, and his driver's license picture looks like, well, he sort of looks like that Luigi guy, to be honest. If you want to know the truth. Like sort of a normal young man, you know, dour, but... If you're listening in the high desert, by the way, and you know anything about this guy, call the Riverside Sheriff or call the feds if you want. The number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Or you can call Z107.7 FM, talk to the news department. Guy Edward Bartkus apparently had close contacts with some other people of this sort, including a girl up in Washington State who was unalived, apparently at her request, by the person she lived with up in Washington State. Let's return to Max Weber, or Max Weber, as we say in Germany. His thesis of modern disenchantment says that in a post-religious industrial age, religious beliefs will find a secular outlet, such as our anti-natalists forming a sort of theology around their death cult. from the supposed rational belief that people should utterly stop reproducing and die out, the sooner the better. It's not enough for them that the world's population is already peaking, already in decline in China, Western Europe, Russia, Japan, South Korea, even parts of Latin America and the Middle East already. The demographic cliff that I have talked about many times on this program over the past 9 years, we're already over that, Reddit or not. So their movement actually will succeed in a sense, but only in the dying out of their own belief system, which is always the case with doomsday suicide cults. The cult ends when the members are gone, whether violently or the old-fashioned way, alone in an apartment somewhere, a feast for the house cats. The people who lived around the bomber's former residence were evacuated on Saturday afternoon so that the bomb squad could go through the place and defuse any special gifts and surprises left by our local lunatic. This was out around Adobe and 2 Mile, you know if you know. Some talk around Freedom Plaza yesterday, some interesting talk among the neighbors. We will likely never know all the details, and ultimately it won't change what happened. And we are only 5 months into the year, a year that started off with a terror attack on the French Quarter, my old hometown, and was quickly followed by a car bomb in Las Vegas, and that's leaving out the weekly car attacks in various European nations. It seems like this is hitting kind of a troubling level of popularity. Disenchantment did not end with Max Weber, who became unalive a century ago. It was just getting started. But this broadcast, with soundscapes by Red, Blue, Black, Silver, and go see his Bandcamp page and maybe buy a couple of his digital releases. I hear he's saving up for something. This show has always been about enchantment. That's why it comes on the radio late at night, 10 p.m. Fridays in the high desert on KCDZ 107.7 FM. The wild desert, history, mythology, prophets, and poets. That's what we do. Thank you for listening, and good night from the voice of the desert.